Our Bible reading today comes from Esther, chapter 4, verses 1 to 17. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold sceptre to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. This is the word of the Lord. Be to God.
Sociologists look at various scenarios and have identified something called the bystander effect. Have you heard of this? Someone's in great peril, someone's in danger. I heard a story this morning about people who have arrived to an accident scene, someone's come off their motorbike. And what the bystander effect is that the more people you get, the less is done. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. But maybe someone has a fall at a shopping centre, and there's 3 or 4 things that kind of happen. One is that the more people there are, the less you feel responsible to do something. The other thing is the less you feel sure of what you're to do, and often you're confronted with ambiguous situations. This is called the bystander effect. And I suspect that this happens in all of life, not just in emergencies when someone's in some great need, but also in our Christian faith. There's things that need to be done. There's scripture in schools that needs to be enacted. There's ministry that needs to take place. There's tech desks that need to be run. There's buildings that need to be repaired. And sometimes it feels like, oh, what am I supposed to do with this? This feels really overwhelming. Well, the bystander effect might be affecting us. Now, this book of Esther gives enormous explanatory power to the issue of personal responsibility. And there's one particular verse which I think stands out. I don't know if you heard it as it was read, but Mordecai says to Esther, "Who knows? Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for a time such as this?" Esther's an interesting book. It's written like a novel, kind of a historical novel, and it's set in about 500 years BC. We've talked a lot about the Babylonian kingdom so far, haven't we? Babylonians came in, they deported the people of Judah, spread them around the kingdom, and we've met various characters that had to figure out how to be faithful to God in this. But here we have the rise of a new kingdom, the Persian kingdom, which has come into power, spread itself out. This is just before the Greek kingdom comes, 200 years later, Alexander the Great and all those things. And at the centre of this particular story in Esther are 2 or 3 characters, 2 of which are called Esther and Mordecai. Now, we met one of them this morning, but Mordecai we heard about. Esther is a young woman who is orphaned at an early age, and Mordecai is her elder cousin. And he takes her in when her parents die and raises her like his daughter. Now imagine yourself for a moment that you're an ethnic minority and you have peculiar traditions that you want to hold to. You don't necessarily want to assimilate into the wider culture. And you've got this kind of ethnic and religious identity, and you're within a very polytheistic Persian empire. And in Persian society, or in the Persian kingdom, there's no personal rights or protections that you have as you try and practice your religious identity, except what the king will give you. The king in ancient Persia has absolute authority, and his favour or disfavour towards you and your people is the difference between suffering and prosperity, the difference between life and death. And into that context comes Esther. The king of Persia, it's quite an awful story actually. The king of Persia is after a new queen, and he holds a nationwide beauty contest, as we heard, and Esther wins. Now, she's a poor orphaned Jewish girl who becomes the queen of Persia overnight. This is a real rags to riches story. She kind of manages to keep her pedigree a secret. The king doesn't know she's Jewish, and he doesn't know that she's just some girl from the poor side. She's from Kringle, right? I can say that because I live there. And she's kind of made it in the big smoke. And as the book unfolds, we hear that the Jewish minority across the empire are in danger. There's this senior cabinet minister in the government, his name is Haman, and he conspires to wipe out the Jews. Now, let me just read to you a little bit about that. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal." I'll fund this. This is a no-brainer policy that you ought to take on. And by the end of chapter 3 of Esther, there are royal couriers travelling throughout the kingdom with this decree. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill and annihilate all the Jews. This is genocide. Young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. And the copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality. There's a day that's coming. Now this puts Mordecai and Esther in real danger and a real bind as to what they should do. Esther's identity as a Jew is unknown. No one's worked out where she's from, and her entire people face annihilation. And so Mordecai goes to the royal gate and gets a message through to her. She's not easy to get hold of. She's an important person now. And he tells her, look, you have to go and sort this out. You need to go to the king and you need to plead with him and beg for mercy that he reverses his decree. And Esther sends a message back. Have a look. Don't have it. What a pain. There it is, in verse 11. This is what she says. You can read it in your notes. She instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, they'll be put to death unless the king extends the golden scepter towards them and spares their lives. It's been 30 days. I'm not due to go before the king. This timing is not working for me, Mordecai, is what she's saying. I'd be happy to consider your offer, but this timing is not in my best interests. I'm putting my life at risk. And then Mordecai sends back this defining message, defining for Esther, defining for the Jews, and defining for us. This is what he says. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. It doesn't all hinge on you, Esther. God will deliver his people. But who knows that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Aren't they just beautiful poetic words? What I love about this response is that it's not dead certainty and it's not hopeless fatalism. We sometimes want to feel really certain about something before we embark upon a particular path. We read parts of the New Testament that sound like we can demand from God things. When Jesus says, don't doubt. If you pray that mountain will be moved to that mountain, to that place, and you don't doubt, it will happen. Have you ever tried that? You ever tried to move a mountain through prayer? Okay? And we think, I want to take that type of certainty and I want to claim it, almost demand it from God. It might be a change of your circumstances, might be your health getting better, might be someone that you really want God to touch in a special way. And we can kind of crave certainty. Or we might fall off the other side of the pendulum and we just want to kind of give up. And we think, well, if God's God, he will do whatever he wants. And it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what I pray. It doesn't matter what I think. That's fatalism. But here is a model of faith which faces difficult circumstances in neither a kind of certain way or an arrogant way, maybe that's a better way of saying it, nor in a hopeless way, but in the grey of life. Is that where you live, in the grey of life? It's where I live. Mordecai doesn't say, God has called you to this. This is God's will for you. God will make your plans prosper and succeed, and you don't have to worry about a thing. It's going to all work out, Esther. It all depends upon you. He doesn't say that. Nor does he become fatalistic. He says, it doesn't matter what you do. God will do whatever. No, he finds a way to live in the grey. And he says, God will act. But maybe God's put you in this position so that he can act through you. Now that is a really interesting model of faith, I think. This takes your and my mundane, ordinary lives, and I think gives it an amazing capacity for a supernatural meaning to be attached to what we do. We are not the centre of God's plans. We are not the kind of heroes that are going to bring about God's kingdom. And yet, maybe God has placed us in our families, in our workplaces, in our voluntary associations, in our churches for such a time as this. This is a cure for the bystander effect in my life and in your life. There's a funny story which I think Lisa often quotes to me in the office. It goes like this. It's a story that says, whose job is it anyway? Have you heard this? It's about 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There were important jobs to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everyone's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realised that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. Now, you need to read that yourself, I think, to kind of follow the threads. But you get it, don't you? No one took responsibility, so nothing got done. That's the point of the story. And so I want to ask you this morning, what is the royal position to which you find yourself in this moment that you have been called? In fact, there's a Bible passage which talks about you as a royal person. The Apostle Peter takes all this language in the Old Testament and he says, this belongs to you, the church of the New Testament. You are a chosen people. You are in a royal position. You are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. You and I are not here by accident. Your eyes saw my unformed body, Psalm 139 says. All the days ordained for me were written in your book. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them even came to be. You matter. You are in a royal position. You're a member of a family, right? You're a friend to somebody. You're a member of this church. You're a worker or a volunteer. Everyone here has the power to affect other people. A royal position in God's book. And you and I are called to be God's person in those relationships and in those workplaces and in those organisations. The Apostle Paul says, how then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him, that is in Jesus, if they've never heard? And how are they to hear without someone telling them? This is not the anybody, somebody, nobody. This is us. We are in a royal position and we are sent to declare in word and in life, in prayer and in action, in the grey. We are sent to declare and live out how good God is. And we need to be more courageous, don't we? More intentional, more committed, more in the grey. Who knows that God has called us for a time such as this?